All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Benjamin Johnson. I'm the event coordinator here for McNally Robinson Booksellers, Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional homeland of the Cree, the Lakota, the Nakota, the Dakota, the Saulteaux, and the Dene, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. As we listen to our speakers share their words today, may we keep in mind the Indigenous stories that have been shared on this land since time immemorial. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Spare the Child, Ending Childhood Corporal Punishment by Ailsa Watkinson, hosted by Rita Bouvier. Thank you so much to Ailsa and Rita for being here and working with us to make this event happen. I should also, just to note, this event is being, oh, don't cut out on me. Just to note, this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam over here. I'd also like to take this time to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. I'd also like to acknowledge it is very cold back here. I'm very sorry. We've been very chilly all day. I'm hoping it'll warm up a little bit as we kind of sit in this area. If you would like to buy copies of Spare the Child, we have some up here on the signing table behind me, as well as where you first walked in. You're welcome to get your book signed. Just please pay for it on the way out, would be good. So to introduce our guests, Rita is a Métis writer from Saskatchewan whose work has appeared in literary anthologies, journals, musicals, and television productions. Her fourth and most recent poetry collection, A Beautiful Rebellion, was published in 2023 by Thistledown Press. Ailsa M. Watkinson is Professor Emerita of Social Work at the University of Regina and a human rights advocate. She is the mother of 3 sons and grandmother to 2 grandchildren. She lives here in Saskatoon. Everyone, please give them both a warm welcome.
Hello, good evening. First of all, welcome to everyone who's here in person. Thank you for coming. And to our audience online, welcome as well. I have to tell the truth, Ailsa is my friend. So I'll try not to put her in a really tough spot with my questioning. Well, actually, she actually knows the questions I'm asking. So to be truthful. So the first thing I want to do is say congratulations, Ailsa. I was saying to you earlier that I really, really loved your book and reading it. What I loved about it was the organization, how you storied corporal punishment, and the detail that you provided in your book. It must have been immense work. And that you should be writing this book, of course, is not something that is a surprise to those of us who know you. And perhaps being a grandma has spurred it on. Yep. Yep, she says. Now, just for a little bit of a book sell. Yes, buy the book. Like I said, it is just beautifully written and very informative, and I think important for our time. So, the way that I designed the questions is a little bit sequential, not intentionally wanting to do that, but because, like I said, she's done such an incredible job of storying the issue of corporal punishment and Section 43 of the Criminal Code. So let's begin first with a definition of corporal punishment. How is it defined, and what is the current law on corporal punishment?
Okay, corporal punishment has been defined by the United Nations to include all physical force designed to cause pain or discomfort. And it includes light spanking, harsh pushing, even talks about burning kids and all kinds of things. So it's any kind of intrusion on another. The definition has been applied against Canada's record 5 times. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink of water. And of course, Canada comes out quite miserably because we've never gotten rid of the permission that parents and teachers have to use corporal punishment. So in that definition, it talks about all kinds of physical intrusion. And the phrase in there is however light. So there's no sort of continuum that measures which is considered corporal punishment or not. It is any kind of physical intrusion on a child.
So I initially said that what might have inspired her to be writing a book on this topic was that she's a grandma, but I know that there's a story also behind what inspired you to write a book on corporal punishment, and maybe you'll share that with us. And maybe tell us as well how long it has taken you to write this book, because as I said, it's very detailed.
Well, I have to say, it has consumed my academic career. I've been writing it. It started, I suppose, in 1995, when I applied through the Court Challenges program to challenge Section 43 of the Criminal Code. I used to work for the Human Rights Commission, and so I was very interested when the charter was coming in. In fact, my buddy, Yvonne, that might be up there someplace watching, she and I used to come home after work and sit there and watch the ministers discuss the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we were quite enthralled with it. So I knew about the Charter. I knew about corporal punishment, having been the victim of it a number of times in school. And so finally, I had written an article, a letter to the editor of one of the op-eds that I'm known to do. And I questioned the use of corporal punishment, considering Section 15 of the Charter, which says you can't discriminate on the basis of age, and that everybody is entitled to equal protection of the law. Well, clearly, children aren't, because Section 43 allows them or gives the right to parents to use force on children. So I started this process in 95, and it just kept going. The case eventually made it to the Supreme Court. And so it was just that the case of corporal punishment is actually at the heart of the book, but it begins with a history of corporal punishment, and then talks about the case and what needs to happen so that we can get rid of it.
Just checking to see if you've answered all of my questions.
Well,
How long did it take you to write this book?
well, I think you could say I probably started in 95, but like my academic career was around corporal punishment. I'd get papers, I'd write journal articles and so on. So I've been working on it for a long time. I can't get over people who say, yes, oh yes, I finished that book. Yeah, I wrote it in a year or two. How can you do that?
Nice. Yes.
One of the questions, though, I didn't finish answering. You asked about corporal punishment, and I gave you the definition from the United Nations. So the situation right now, as a result of the case that went to the Supreme Court, is that Section 43 is still there, but the court limited its scope, which means that they put limits on when Section 43 could be used as a defense. So things like, they said you can't use corporal punishment on children under the age of 2 and over the age of 12. Mark, you had a wonderful line about that 10-year period of free reign. I mean, these things are quite bizarre. So you can't hit a kid under 2 because you won't know why you're hitting them. That's what they said. You can't hit a child over 12 because they could hit you back. You can't hit on the head. You cannot use a weapon. You cannot hit a child who's got a disability. You cannot hit a child in anger, and so on. It goes. To use Mark's work again, is bizarre.
Okay, so in section 1 of the book takes a historical gaze on childhood and corporal punishment, and so my next set of questions are related to that. You in particular take a look at its origins and its premise in the first chapter. So how did it become acceptable, and how was it justified historically? Share a Cole's notes version.
Well, I mean, it's corporal punishment, thrashing, lashings has been throughout civilization. So nobody seems to know where it came from, but it was certainly promoted and expanded upon by Christianity. Somebody talks that there was a paper written saying, what are we going to do with Proverbs? And others have said that the Old Testament is one of the most egregious sentences on children. So the Bible, sad to say, has had quite an impact on this. And of course, it expanded through colonization. Christians wanted to Christianize the Indigenous people and so on. So there's quite a history behind Christianity, colonization, conquering, and the violence that comes with it. So you've probably heard, as we all have, that great line, spare the rod, spoil the child. It actually doesn't even come from the Bible. It's not in the Bible. It is a phrase that comes from a masochistic play that was written in about the 1700s. And it's got a poem. In fact, I quote it in the book, and it ends up, it's quite racy, frankly, and then it ends up with this line about spare the rod and spoil the child. So people try and use that, but it's not in the Bible. There are things, obviously, in the Old Testament that could be used to argue for corporal punishment, but as people keep saying, trying to remind people, Jesus himself never talked this way. He never promoted punishment of children at all.
So you've already made, reference to colonization, and you do devote a chapter to it. And I really was very interested in reading that chapter. And in particular, you focus on the work also of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In your sort of analysis, critical review, I think is what it is, and critical analysis of, what has happened over time with respect to this idea of hitting children, for lack of a better word.
Well, that's the word.
Okay, hitting children. What effect did this thinking have on Indigenous childhood? And in particular, of course, I'm tying it into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report on residential schools. And how does it tie in with what we're talking about, Section 43 in particular?
Well, I think it ties in perfectly, because at the time of colonization, some of the explorers and missionaries and so on commented on the fact that Indigenous communities did not physically hit their kids. They allowed them to grow and roam, and these, like David Thompson commented, like how unusual it was. These children sort of had free reign. They were well looked after, but there was no physical punishment meted out. And some of the early colonizers would lament this, saying they're allowed to just run wild, they need to be corporally punished, etc. So there's this debate going on amongst the colonizers about what in the world is going on here. So it's a good example of how that society changed, because of course through colonization and then the history of residential schools really changed that. I mean, it took the children away from their communities, from their families, from the land, from their culture, and it just stripped them of all identity. And then on top of that, of course, was just the horror that residential schools, that's their history. It's just a history of horror and beatings and death and illness. So it's important for us to know that, because of the intergenerational impact of all of this, which of course is what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report makes very clear, as well as many other writers. I just want to say that here in Saskatchewan, there's a number of writers whose work I was reviewing as I was going into this topic. And one of them is here. In fact, at the back is Sylvia McAdam, who has written a book called Nationhood Interrupted. And I use a lot of her work as well. I can never say these Cree words, but she talks about a Cree word for children. And it is a sacred fire, something to be nourished and encouraged. So that distinction of Indigenous life before colonization to what it has become has got tied into it a history of abuse, neglect, discrimination, racism, etc. And it's intergenerational.
And so I also read in that particular chapter that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually recommended that Section 43 of the Criminal Code be struck.
It did indeed. It's the call to action number 6. And they said that corporal punishment is a relic of discredited past and that it should be repealed. And I'm not going to get through this without getting political, so here I go. The report came out in 2015. Justin Trudeau was elected that year and said he would incorporate all 94 calls to action. There's an organization that's been tracking the number of recommendations that have been accepted. They've given up because nothing is happening. A few have changed, but this one, number 6, would have been so easy to get rid of, because of course he had a majority government to begin with, talking about Justin Trudeau. Then he had a minority, but he had the NDP with him. They could have done it easily. One of the things they kept talking about was they had to do it in consultation with Indigenous communities. As far as I know, there was no discussion. But apart from that, you had the Truth and Reconciliation report saying Section 43 should be gone. It was used to Christianize and civilize Indigenous people, and it is a discredited history. So nothing's happened.
And so in chapter 3, you kind of, at least while I was reading it, I in progression as I did, it occurred to me that something is really gone amok here, because what we see then is, in your telling of this story, is that you map the development of child welfare in as it develops in the provinces and territories, and And there's a movement to protect children from abuse through, various instruments. There's reports, there's all kinds of campaigns, of course, including the Charter of Rights that come about, and rights and freedoms, and then the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The question I want to ask you is, how important have the developments and the movements in child welfare, be it legislation or aid societies, including the Charter and UN Convention, been to our understanding and rethinking of childhood and children's rights? Have they been useful, helpful?
Well, they certainly have been. I mean, they've set limits and they've set protection criteria for children. But in particular, when it comes to corporal punishment, I'll just give an example. In Saskatchewan, we've got the Child and Family Services Act, etc., but we've also got a protocol, the Saskatchewan protocol for that's to be applied in case of child maltreatment. When it comes to corporal punishment and maltreatment, of course, child maltreatment includes sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and spiritual abuse. But of course, I've focused on physical abuse because it's the only abuse that is permitted. It's literally permitted. So when it comes to their protocol here in Saskatchewan, it talks about what's not permitted, when it comes to hitting children and so on. But it describes it as anything that causes injury, and it's seen as cruel and excessive corporal punishment. So they use the word cruel and excessive to sort of modify corporal punishment. Well, it shouldn't be cruel in the first place, obviously, and it shouldn't be corporal punishment either. So I've gone back and forth with the Department of Social Services saying, get rid of this. Like, you don't need to say it's okay to have corporal punishment so long as it's not cruel or excessive. Just say no corporal punishment, that end. So while we've got legislation to protect children, there's these caveats on it that don't do any good, that keep corporal punishment in its place. It's still the right of parents to use it. We need to come up with a flat statement, no violence. So I just want to add one other thing. I'm just going to check our time. Yeah. So what we need and what has happened in other countries, Sweden led the way in this whole thing about getting rid of the permission that parents have to use corporal punishment. Instead, they took it out of the criminal code, or equivalent of the criminal code, and they put it into the Child and Family Services Act. They're a partner in that way. So because Section 43 is in the criminal code, in order to prove that somebody has assaulted a child and is being charged, the child literally has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this has happened. It's an absolute powerful wall for any child and their advocate to get over. You have to show beyond reasonable doubt. It's like murder. You have to show beyond reasonable doubt. So if we took it out, Section 43 out, we could place into our Child and Family Services Act some of the statements that other countries have put in, which literally say things like, every child is entitled to a life without violence, with a life of caring and compassion and guidance and so on. So some of the ones, and I've got some of them in the book, they're beautiful. They're beautiful statements, positive statements in the child and family services equivalent. So you take it out of the criminal code, rid of section 43, switch over to the civil laws and make those statements there. And so, for example, in Cyprus, they have included in their domestic violence acts, domestic violence would include violence against children. Most of them here in Saskatchewan, the same thing. When we talk about domestic violence, it's the partner. And yet in the same household, children could be being harmed, but they are not covered under Domestic Violence Act. So we could do something like that. And as I was saying, in Cyprus, they, if the harm committed is so egregious that it goes to an actual trial and there's a sentence, person who has harmed somebody in their home, a family member, is given a harsher sentence than if they did the same thing to somebody outside of their home. So there's all kinds of ideas of what we could do to enhance the well-being and the rights of children and at the same time try and eliminate some of those absolutely impossible things that they have to climb in order to prove that they have indeed been assaulted.
Thanks, Ailsa, for like sharing, you know, where we go from here, because one can feel, you know, quite dismal about looking at the situation and the fact that, you know, we continue have to deal with section 43 and as it stands. So in section 2 of your book, this is where it really gets very interesting, of course, and you are the star. No, well, not the star, but you are one of the players in the legal challenge that goes before the Supreme Court for section 43, which you already said began in 1995. And I recognize now why I was confused and I thought it was 1998, because the case actually was heard in 1998, but the work began in 1995. I just learned that in your comments. Now I get it. You can see that, you know, although I read the book, there were things I had little side notes. I always like to write on the little side notes when I read books. But again, you highlighted when the legal challenge came before the Supreme Court in 1998, that you saw it as a missed opportunity. And I could tell reading that particular chapter, 3 chapters actually, that you were very disappointed in the outcome of the case. So maybe share with our audience, again, a Cole's notes of, you know, the divergent views that were held and the role you played.
Well, the role I played was to get things going, I suppose. But of course, the lawyers took over. It's usually what happens. And it was fine. I attended all the hearings. And the whole process, here comes the politics again. Because, I mean, corporal punishment has been seen as one of the culture wars. Some of you here will remember Judith Martin, and she was the one who at one point said to me, you should pursue this section 15 argument about corporal punishment. And then she said to me, I think it's going to be as big an issue as gun control. I thought, good heavens, I can hardly believe that. And in fact, when we started this case, we honestly thought it was, and this was one of the lawyers' phrases, it's a slam dunk. And of course, it didn't turn out to be that way. But one of the things that happen when you have a charter challenge is that interveners can come forward and put their 2 cents in, so long as it's a different argument from, they've got something new to add to it. So the makeup of the interveners in the case was actually very, very interesting. Many organizations applied to represent, let's say, our side. This Canadian Association of Social Workers, the United Church of Canada, the Youth in Care. There was a wide array of interveners that asked to take part, but the only one that was accepted was the Ontario Children's Aid Society. On the other side, which of course was the Attorney General's side, because they were defending Section 43, there was a coalition that put themselves together just for the case. And that coalition was made up of Focus on the Family. Does anybody remember them? Oh, God. Then there was the Canadian Family Action, and that is Charles McGetty, who he was at the case when I went to the Supreme Court. He was one of the people sitting there, and he had on his wall after the case a frame of the National Post where he was quoted as saying, "I'm a spanker," and he was very proud of this, and he framed it and put it up on the wall. So there's another organization called the Home School Legal Defense Fund. They're the organization that funds homeschoolers, who will argue that they should be able to have their children at home on the basis of their religion. And the good old REAL women. And they were just this coalition under this new name, but there were all these organizations that I'd been watching and thinking, oh my God, here they come, and all in one. I was just going to check. Oh yeah, the Real Women, there's their website and so on. You say things that their primary responsibility was to allow parents to raise and educate their children. But they were always a thorn in our side when I was working at the Human Rights Commission. Anyway, they were there. So that was their coalition, and the Canadian Teachers Federation, sorry to say, they were on the other side defending the right to use corporal punishment on children. Actually, I've got to be careful there. They were not going to defend corporal punishment. Their argument was that they needed Section 43 because they would need to restrain students at some point. But the criminal code allows for has other sections that permit you to use force if needed to protect children. The old argument, well, then I can't. What if he runs out in the road? Can I not hold them back? Yes, of course you can. You're protecting them. Yes, you can protect them by putting them into their car seats, even if they don't want to go, that kind of thing. So there's other sections and you and I can use them. Like if I threaten you verbally, you can charge me with assault. And I could try and say, well, I was protecting myself because, or if you try and attack me, I can protect myself from you using another section. So those sections are there. The teachers don't need Section 43. I'm pointing at you, Rita. So,
no, we don't.
Sorry. And the teachers actually had, they do not use corporal punishment. I mean, they said that, but for them to come and try and defend Section 43 was shameful.
Yes, and at the time when this case was going on, of course, I was working with the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. So it'll be confession time here, but thank you for that correction. As I said, I could tell when you read this chapter, it was extremely disappointing I think that the Section 43 was upheld. And so let's get closer to home now and maybe visit the case against Valor Academy by former students. The case that was brought forward against the Valor Academy by former students. You not only follow the case as friends, we're fully aware of that, but you were physically present in the courts to support students. What are your thoughts on that case in context of the book that you've just written on corporal punishment?
Well, I actually do make a small reference to the case because as we try and think about why do some people still support and fight hard to maintain Section 43. And of course, it honestly comes down to ideology and political stance, etc. And so when you look at what happened in Valor, it's changed its name so many times. It was the Legacy Christian School. Do you remember the case? Just to quickly say, students came forward in 2022 and said that they had been beaten at their school and went to the police, and plus they filed a civil suit. So the case has been heard over and over again. And when I say over and over again, because it was so many people who were charged. The church is a fundamentalist Christian school. It is a politically conservative. In fact, the students were forced to go out and campaign for conservative members of parliament and candidates for the mayor of Saskatoon. And so it lines up with the ideology and the religious beliefs of those who support corporal punishment. So when the case first came out, the CBC reporter called me because he knew my work with corporal punishment. And I was just stunned by the story. And of course, as it's progressed, those students, they have been lambasted by very powerful people. But what they've been talking about is true. It happened to them. It was brutal. It was sadistic in so many cases too. So I used that case to sort of show the culture war dichotomy that goes on. And I think these religious schools are a prime example of it. One of the defendants, the principal, well, actually, he was the director / principal. They couldn't figure out actually what his role was. But anyway, they tried to use the fact that the Section 43 was a defense for them. And the judge didn't allow it. And the thing is, I could never get that decision because there's media, what do you call it? They put a publication ban, thank you, on the case. But they tried, one of the defendants did try to argue Section 43, that they had the permission to do this. The judge considered it and ruled against it. But as I said, I couldn't see the decision. They wouldn't release it. I did ask for it. But I do think it had something to do with the fact that Section 43, it was there. It was changed. Some of the limitations were placed on it after the actual beatings. But the limitations that were placed, that were expanded on in the decision, were actually there anyway. And even if they had tried to use Section 43 as a defense, they couldn't have gotten away with it because they were teenagers, they used a weapon, etc. Some of the things that the court said were limited in the use of Section 43. So this ties back, of course, to the whole business about religion and its sad impact and history on the treatment of children.
Just a question. How much time do we have?
Oh, we got about 20 minutes left.
20 minutes? Okay. Maybe what I'm going to do is just share with you that the next section is on the research and where do we go from here. And Ailsa has done a wonderful job of highlighting the research and evidence that's out there in terms of the long-term effects on corporal punishment on children, not only in terms of their social development, but their mentally physically and psychologically speaking and spiritually. And I mean, I think it's really significant in terms of what the research tells us and the long-term effects it has on children as they become adults, and really the societal effects that we see within, our own communities. And but what I want to ask Ailsa, just for the sake of time, is maybe to share with us, to go beyond that in terms of, what resources are available. I have two more questions. What resources are available to parents and caregivers to support the developing nature, to nurture children so that they become healthy people, adults in the end?
Well, I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But when it comes to corporal punishment, there are some really good programs out there. They talk about positive discipline. So one of the ones that I want to give a shout out to is positive parenting. Okay, I'm going to get the title wrong. Positive parenting, no, positive discipline in everyday parenting. And it's a program that was developed by Joan Durant from the University of Manitoba, along with others. It was instigated through Save the Children. And the whole premise behind it, which makes just intuitive good sense, is that when dealing with children, and instead of using violence, talk to them, explain to them what the consequences are of what it is they are doing. If they, and talk to them at their level. If they are too young to understand language, distract them, do whatever, provide, but talk to them. It's communication, it's getting down to their level. It is providing consistency. And I've just got to add this one little thing. My sisters-in-law went to Sweden at one point, and they came back and told us that they couldn't use corporal punishment in Sweden. This was big news for all of us. And so my sister-in-law at one point picked up one of our kids who was doing something they shouldn't have done. And she said, you're supposed to distract them. You're supposed to distract them. So she's got hold of him and she says, look, a radio. So that became the line around our house, trying to get the child to find something else to do. So that's, I guess, just bottom line, obviously, it's just work with children without violence.
Well, that's a very strong message. So I have one more question because I'm returning to chapter 3 in your book. In your view and in general terms, how effective are the human rights instruments, have the human rights instruments been in social transformation? Because I know they're at the heart of your work.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all of them. And I think they have played a huge role in all kinds of changes, societal changes. When I was teaching, I always went through the Charter, taught it, used it in policy classes, used it in ethics classes, and so on. And it has been transformational. My biggest worry right now is the alacrity with which some governments are using the notwithstanding clause. I think that's the biggest threat right now. And I'd say to my students, if you ever hear the notwithstanding clause being used, I hope every alarm goes off in your head and you get out there and protest. So it really is concerning. And I think we've got to stand up, we've got to take note of this, because you can watch what's happening to human rights in the United States right now and how things have just switched. It just takes my breath away. I just think, I can't believe this. One day after the other, things just that we've taken for granted and worked so hard for. And so even though I still have great faith in it, and with all of us in halting the use of the notwithstanding clause, I think it's one of the most important documents we've got as a country.
Okay, I hope that has given you a good sense of the book and you're going to buy it. But now it's your turn to ask some questions. Do you have any questions or comments you would like to make or offer?
All right, I can run the microphone to whoever's brave enough to ask any questions. Anybody? In the chat either. Perfect.
Thanks so much, Ailsa. Just on that important last point, leaving the notwithstanding clause aside, and I'm so pleased to hear hope continues to burn for the Charter and those kinds of things. But having said that, didn't work at all in a sense in relation to that. So what are your thoughts in the face of all that? As I say, I'm so pleased to hear that that the spirit goes on for that. But do you have thoughts on the rights project going forward in that particular way?
Well, I think first of all, we could try again, right? And you've written about this. But I worry about Poilievre using the notwithstanding clause, because he has said he has no qualms about using it. So you scare me when you make this sound like you're not as enthused or don't want to have the hope. But we have to. We've just got to have the hope. We've got to hang on to it. We've got to do something about it. And I wouldn't give up. I'm not going to give up, obviously. But I don't think trying that case again, I wouldn't do it. I think we had 2 private members' bills just before government was prorogued the last time, and they could have gone through. I mean, it looked like it was going to happen. Private members' bill calling for the end of Section 43. So I think that's the way it's got to go. The government's got to do something about it, Tracy. And she's on side, I know that. But when it comes to children's rights, I'm not sure. I mean, parents' rights have just taken over. And again, we've got to argue against that, but that's what happened in the case, right? The case turned from a case about children's rights to parents' rights. The court was so concerned that parents were going to be criminalized. That was said over and over again. And so they just turned to parents' rights. So they've got the upper hand. There's no doubt about that. But anyway, I'll keep trying, and you too.
Any other questions?
I'll have a question.
Sure.
Since you gave me a job, Tracy Muglin, I'm a senator for Saskatchewan, and I just wanted to say that since 2015, when there's been independent appointments to the Senate, we now have 105 members in Senate, and 94 of them are independent. And since the independent Senate has come about, there are a large number of senators with human rights backgrounds. We have Senator Kim Pate, who's a huge advocate for prisoner rights. We have new appointee Christopher Wells, who's a huge advocate for LGBTQ. We have Duncan Wilson, also a huge advocate for LGBT. We have Wanda Thomas Bernard, huge advocate for Black rights. And so we're starting to see private member bills public Senate bills being initiated, because senators are initiating their own bills. And when senators initiate their own bills, God willing, they get over to the other places, we call it, and move through their motions in a timely fashion before we're prorogued or there's an election. Senate bills quite frequently, almost always, pass. So given that there's such a large number of advocates, human rights advocates in the Senate, I just want to give people hope, because I think there's a number of bills right now that are human rights focused. Senator Peter Harder has one on the notwithstanding clause. And the whole point of it is to ensure that the notwithstanding clause is never used inappropriately. So there's a lot of dialogue going on around human rights, and I think there's things we can do out of the Senate, given who's there now, to try to deal with a whole bunch of things, and perhaps a public Senate bill on Section 43.
That's good, thank you. Good phrasing. Hopeful.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I have one of my own, if I may. This is host privilege. So in like talking to older members of my family, for instance, who, I don't know, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about like how to talk to members of one's family about this, or like people who are kind of like, well, I was hit as a kid, so, and I'm fine. I wonder if you have any thoughts on like how to talk to people in regards to that sort of attitude.
I want to say I'm not the person to ask that question. I'll try, because I do try. I try to convince people, but I'm not very good at it. So I think, though, if you talk about the research, you can just talk about some of the research has grown exponentially since the case was heard in 2004. And it just points to this mental illnesses, physical illnesses. I mean, one of the recent ones that I just cite in my book talks about how corporal punishment and other complications in one's life can lead to a shorter life, like diseases, heart disease, lung, liver. But apart from that, we know that for young children who are traumatized with violence, that it disrupts their brain development. And they talk about the architecture of the brain. It disturbs it. They talk about toxic stress, and it's a matter of the hormones that are released. And so we've got evidence of decrease in cognition, more evidence of mental health, suicide ideation. It goes on and on. And in fact, one of the studies said, if we could get rid of all of this violence in people's lives, it would decrease the antisocial behavior of men and women by 50%. So you can, and this, to come upon a society that doesn't have violence is pretty rare, but they have, some of the researchers have talked about some of the societies where there is less violence, and of course that means there's less corporal punishment, and again, it's intergenerational. What goes on in the society isn't as violent. So that's one thing I think you can talk about. You could also talk about the ethics. I mean, let's talk about the ethics of intruding onto people and the dignity, children. Donna Greshner, I took a class from Donna, some of you will remember her, and we were talking about corporal punishment, and she said, it's so strange that some people don't get it, because every child who faces some sort of sense of violence, and we all have, we're outraged by it. And we were all children once, and yet that empathy seems to dissipate. But good news is that young parents are using corporal punishment much less than we did as children ourselves, and perhaps parents. And one of the studies that was done said that apart from just the information that's out there now, they said that the case of corporal punishment that went to the Supreme Court, it got a lot of publicity at that time. And so they said, well, maybe the case did something in the long run, to eliminate the use of corporal punishment. Mm-hmm. Good question. Sorry.
And I also think that, just as part of that research and evidence is the report on residential schools from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there you can see exactly what Ailsa has pointed out in one community, a large community across this country, and the effects that has had intergenerationally on people.
Totally. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. Any last call for questions? Anybody? We have no one on the chat. Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, thank you both for being here once again. Thank you for all the good work that you've done and the research that has gone into this book. Just a reminder for everybody, we have copies over here on our table. We also have copies up here. And if you don't, I encourage you to buy a book and get it signed. But if you don't want to get it signed, I'm sure both Rita and Ailsa would love to say hi anyway. So a round of applause for both of them. And